Alex Carter lived a quiet life in a tidy suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and neatly painted houses stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the kind of place where people prided themselves on keeping things orderly, and Alex fit right in. They weren't flashy or loud, just someone who enjoyed their little corner of the world, tending to their garden and occasionally chatting with neighbors over the fence. Life was peaceful until one day, an envelope arrived in the mailbox that would change everything. The letter inside wasn't from a friend or even a bill. It was from the Homeowners Association, HOA, the governing body responsible for maintaining the neighborhood's pristine appearance. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. A notice informing Alex of a violation regarding their front yard. Apparently, the hedge near the driveway had grown slightly too tall, disrupting what the HOA called the visual harmony of the street. Alex sighed but didn't think much of it. After all, rules were rules, and everyone followed them to keep the neighborhood looking nice. So they trimmed the hedge back promptly and moved on with their day. But then another letter came, and another. Each time, the violations grew stranger and more specific. One complained about the color of Alex's porch light, which apparently clashed with the approved palette outlined in some obscure HOA guideline Alex had never heard of. Another cited the placement of a small decorative flagpole in the yard, claiming it violated the no freestanding structures rule. Yet another demanded Alex remove a bird feeder because it attracted squirrels, which were deemed a nuisance despite being part of nature. At first, Alex tried to comply. They changed the light bulb, took down the flagpole, and reluctantly said goodbye to the cheerful birds that used to visit daily. But no matter how many changes they made, the letters kept coming. Every few weeks, there was something new. A complaint about the mailbox style, the type of flowers planted, even the way Alex parked their car in the driveway. The sheer volume of nitpicky rules left Alex feeling like they couldn't win. What puzzled Alex most was why they seemed to be the only target. Neighbors appeared to live freely without constant scrutiny. Mrs. Thompson across the street had gnomes lining her walkway, and Mr. Puddle 2 doors down let his dog bark endlessly without anyone saying a word. Why then was Alex singled out? Was it personal, or was there something else going on? The frustration began to weigh heavily on Alex. What started as mild annoyance turned into sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if moving might be the only solution. But leaving felt unfair. They loved their home and had worked hard to make it theirs. Still, the barrage of accusations made them question whether staying was worth it. Little did Alex know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would uncover secrets lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect neighborhood. Something was off, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay hidden somewhere close by, waiting to be uncovered. The constant stream of violation notices gnawed at Alex, leaving them restless and increasingly suspicious. Something about the situation didn't add up. Why was the HOA targeting them so relentlessly, while other neighbors seemed to go about their lives without interference? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Alex decided to dig deeper. Their first step was talking to neighbors. Alex started casually mentioning the HOA letters during conversations, over coffee with Mrs. Thompson, or while helping Mr. Patel carry groceries inside. To Alex's surprise, many neighbors admitted they'd noticed the same thing. Alex was being singled out. Some even confessed feeling uneasy about how aggressively the HOA had been acting lately. A few whispered rumors floated around. One neighbor mentioned overhearing the HOA board members discussing Alex's property during a meeting, though no one could explain why. Curiosity piqued. Alex decided to attend an HOA meeting for the first time. These monthly gatherings were usually sparsely attended, dominated by the same handful of people who seemed to thrive on enforcing rules. Sitting quietly in the back of the room, Alex listened as the board reviewed complaints and issued warnings to homeowners. When Alex's name came up, the tone shifted. The board president spoke vaguely about non-compliance and repeated infractions, but avoided specifics when pressed. It was clear they didn't want to address the issue directly, which only fueled Alex's determination to find answers. After the meeting, Alex approached one of the quieter board members, a soft-spoken woman named Linda. Sensing her discomfort with the way things were run, Alex asked if she knew anything about why their property had become such a focus. Linda hesitated before leaning in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. She hinted that there might be something unusual about Alex's land, something the board had been concerned about for years, but refused to elaborate further, glancing nervously toward the others. Her cryptic comment lingered in Alex's mind long after the meeting ended. Back home, Alex began sorting through old documents related to the house. They'd purchased it years ago from a distant relative, inheriting not just the structure, but also boxes of paperwork that had sat untouched in the attic ever since. As they sifted through faded contracts, tax records, and letters, one document caught their eye, a deed written in their late grandfather's name. At first glance, it looked ordinary, detailing ownership of the house and its surrounding plot. But tucked into the corner of the page was a note referencing additional land nearby. Intrigued, Alex dug deeper, cross-referencing the information with maps of the neighborhood. What they discovered left them stunned. The deed indicated that their family owned not only their current property, but also a sizable parcel of undeveloped land within the subdivision, including the exact lot where the HOA office now stood. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? Had anyone else known? And more importantly, did the HOA realize they were operating on land that technically belonged to Alex? The pieces slowly began falling into place. The relentless violations, the evasive behavior of the board members, the hushed whispers. It all made sense now. Alex felt a mix of anger and disbelief. For years, the HOA had treated them like an outsider, scrutinizing every detail of their life. Yet they'd been living and working on land that rightfully belonged to Alex's family. Armed with this revelation, Alex resolved to confront the HOA, not just about the violations, but about their blatant disregard for the truth. This wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about justice. As Alex prepared to take action, they couldn't help but wonder how far the board would go to protect their secret. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The quiet suburban neighborhood was about to face a storm it would never forget. The discovery of the deed sent Alex's mind racing. They spent hours poring over the document, cross-referencing it with maps and records to confirm its validity. It was hard to believe that such a monumental detail had slipped through the cracks for so long. According to the paperwork, Alex's late grandfather had purchased the additional land decades ago, but never developed it. Over time, as the neighborhood grew and the HOA was established, the lot became part of the subdivision, without anyone realizing who truly owned it. As Alex traced the boundaries of the property on an old map, their eyes landed on the exact location where the HOA office now stood. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. The HOA had built their headquarters on land that belonged to Alex's family. No wonder they had been targeted so aggressively. Perhaps the board members knew something, or at least suspected, that they weren't willing to admit openly. The violation suddenly felt less like nitpicking and more like intimidation tactics designed to push Alex out of the picture entirely. Determined to understand how this oversight had happened, Alex reached out to a local historian named Mr. Grayson, who specialized in researching property histories. Sitting in his cluttered office, filled with dusty books and faded photographs, Alex shared the deed and explained what they had uncovered. Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses and studied the document carefully before nodding thoughtfully. "This is fascinating," he said, pulling out a large map of the area from decades earlier. He pointed to the parcel in question. Back then, this land wasn't zoned for residential use. It was considered undeveloped farmland. Your grandfather must have bought it as an investment, thinking it might appreciate in value over time. But when developers came in to build this subdivision, they likely assumed the land was unclaimed or abandoned. Alex leaned forward, absorbing every word. So no one bothered to check ownership before building the HOA office. Mr. Grayson shrugged. It's possible. Developers often focus on getting projects off the ground quickly without double-checking every detail. If no one raised any objections during construction, they probably figured everything was fine. Armed with this new perspective, Alex began piecing together the timeline. Their grandfather had passed away years ago, leaving behind scattered assets that were divided among relatives. The deed to the additional land had ended up tucked away in a box of forgotten papers, overlooked by everyone, including Alex. Meanwhile, the HOA had gone about constructing their office, blissfully unaware of the legal minefield they were sitting on. But what if the HOA did know? What if someone had stumbled upon the truth years ago and decided to bury it rather than deal with the consequences? The thought sent chills down Alex's spine. If that were the case, then the endless stream of violation notices took on a sinister tone. Maybe the HOA wasn't just trying to enforce rules. They were trying to drive Alex away before they discovered the truth. That night, unable to sleep, Alex sat at the kitchen table staring at the deed. This revelation changed everything. For years, they'd felt powerless against the HOA's relentless scrutiny, but now they held the upper hand. Still, confronting the board wouldn't be easy. The HOA wielded significant influence in the neighborhood, and challenging them meant risking backlash, not just from the board, but potentially from neighbors caught in the middle. Despite the uncertainty ahead, Alex couldn't ignore the sense of justice bubbling inside them. Their family had been wronged, and it was time to set things right. With a deep breath, they resolved to take action, not just for themselves, but for everyone else who had ever felt bullied by the HOA. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a fight Alex hadn't asked for, but one they were ready to win. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and Alex knew this was their moment to confront the board. They spent the days leading up to it preparing carefully, making copies of the deed, marking maps to clearly show the disputed land, and rehearsing what they would say. It wasn't just about presenting evidence. It was about exposing the truth in a way that left no room for denial or evasion. When the night of the meeting arrived, Alex walked into the community center with a folder tucked under their arm. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as neighbors took their seats, but Alex's presence seemed to draw curious glances. Most people weren't used to seeing them at these gatherings, let alone looking so determined. As Alex settled into a chair near the front, they couldn't help but notice the wary looks exchanged between the HOA board members seated at the head table. The meeting began routinely enough, with the president droning on about upcoming landscaping projects and parking restrictions. But when it came time for homeowner comments, Alex stood up, their heart pounding but their voice steady. "I'd like to address something important," they said, holding up the folder. "It concerns my property. And yours." A hush fell over the room as Alex laid out the documents one by one. First, they showed the deed proving ownership of not only their home, but also the additional parcel of land within the subdivision. Then they pointed to the map, highlighting the exact location where the HOA office now stood. "This building," Alex said firmly, "is on land that belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the audience. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale. The president, a man named Mr. Harper, tried to downplay the situation. "There must be some mistake here," he stammered. "We've been operating here for years without any issues." Alex didn't back down. "If there's a mistake, it's on your end, not mine. You built your office without verifying ownership. That's negligence, plain and simple." Tension crackled in the air as accusations flew back and forth. One board member accused Alex of fabricating the claim, while another suggested the deed might be outdated or invalid. But Alex remained calm, countering each argument with facts. They explained how the land had been purchased decades ago by their grandfather and overlooked during the development of the neighborhood. Every word they spoke was backed by documentation, leaving the board scrambling for excuses. Neighbors watched intently, some whispering among themselves. Many had long suspected the HOA of playing favorites or bending rules to suit their agenda, but this revelation was beyond anything they'd imagined. Mrs. Thompson leaned over to her husband and muttered, "No wonder they've been so hard on Alex. They were trying to scare them off." As the confrontation escalated, tempers flared. Mr. Harper attempted to regain control of the meeting, insisting that further discussion should happen privately. But Alex refused to let the matter drop. "This isn't just about me," they said, addressing the crowd. "This is about transparency and accountability. How can we trust an organization that knowingly operates on someone else's property?" The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Even those who had previously stayed silent began nodding along. For the first time, the HOA's authority was being openly challenged, and not just by Alex, but by the very community they claimed to serve. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. The board retreated in disarray, their carefully constructed image of infallibility shattered. Meanwhile, Alex felt a mix of triumph and unease. They had exposed the truth, but the fight was far from over. As they packed up their documents and headed home, they couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only beginning. The fallout from the explosive HOA meeting rippled through the neighborhood like a storm surge, leaving everyone reeling. By the next morning, whispers about Alex's revelation had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves suddenly found themselves drawn into heated discussions over coffee, at bus stops, and even in grocery store aisles. The quiet suburban community, typically united by its shared commitment to order and aesthetics, was now buzzing with questions and anger. For years, many residents had quietly resented the HOA's iron grip on their lives. Rules about mailbox colors, fence heights, and holiday decorations often felt excessive, but most people complied without complaint, fearing fines or retaliation. Now, however, the discovery that the HOA had built its office on land it didn't own ignited a wave of outrage. People began sharing stories of their own run-ins with the board, unreasonable demands, ignored appeals, and favoritism toward certain homeowners. It seemed everyone had a grievance, and Alex's courage inspired them to speak up. Determined to uncover more, Alex hired a lawyer to investigate further. The attorney, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Ms. Patel, quickly dug into the HOA's records. What she found was startling. Not only had the HOA failed to verify ownership of the land before constructing their office, but they also appeared to have knowingly suppressed information about the deed when it surfaced during early development stages. Documents revealed that a junior developer had flagged the issue decades ago, only for higher-ups to dismiss it as unlikely to cause problems. This blatant disregard for due diligence painted a damning picture of arrogance and complacency. Meanwhile, Alex became an accidental leader in the neighborhood. Residents flocked to their homes seeking advice, solidarity, and answers. One evening, a small group gathered in Alex's living room to strategize. There was Mrs. Thompson, eager to challenge the HOA's ban on her beloved garden gnomes, Mr. Patel, frustrated by the exorbitant fees he'd been charged for minor infractions, and several others who simply wanted fairness restored. Together, they decided to form a coalition aimed at reforming, or dismantling, the current HOA structure. As momentum grew, so did pressure on the board. Local news outlets caught wind of the controversy and began reporting on it, shining a spotlight on the neighborhood's turmoil. Reporters interviewed Alex, who framed the situation not as a personal vendetta, but as a call for justice and transparency. Their measured tone and undeniable evidence won public sympathy, turning the story into a rallying cry against unchecked authority. Faced with mounting scrutiny, the HOA scrambled to save face. At the following meeting, Mr. Harper attempted to apologize, claiming the oversight was unintentional and pledging to rectify the situation. But his words rang hollow. When pressed about specifics, like how they planned to compensate Alex for years of harassment, he offered vague promises instead of concrete solutions. The audience erupted in frustration, refusing to accept anything less than accountability. Behind closed doors, tensions within the board reached a breaking point. Accusations flew as members blamed one another for allowing the crisis to spiral out of control. Some resigned outright, unwilling to shoulder responsibility for what increasingly looked like gross misconduct. Others clung desperately to their positions, hoping to ride out the storm. Through it all, Alex remained steadfast. Though initially reluctant to step into the role of advocate, they realized their actions were sparking meaningful change. The neighborhood wasn't just questioning the HOA. It was rediscovering the power of unity. Slowly but surely, cracks were forming in the foundation of fear and compliance that had long defined life in the subdivision. And while the road ahead promised challenges, Alex knew they weren't walking it alone anymore. With the neighborhood in an uproar and the HOA's credibility shattered, Alex found themselves at the center of a movement they hadn't planned but couldn't ignore. The coalition of neighbors, now calling themselves the Community Reform Group, held regular meetings to discuss their next steps. Armed with legal advice from Ms. Patel and fueled by growing support from residents, they crafted a plan to hold the HOA accountable while pushing for lasting change. Ms. Patel advised against pursuing a full-blown lawsuit, warning that it could drag on for years and drain resources. Instead, she suggested negotiating a settlement that would address Alex's grievances while forcing the HOA to make significant reforms. At the same time, the group began drafting petitions to dissolve the current board and establish new leadership, a move that required signatures from a majority of homeowners. Word spread quickly, and soon lines formed outside Alex's house as neighbors eagerly signed on. The pressure mounted for the HOA. Facing public backlash, potential legal action, and dwindling support, the remaining board members agreed to meet with Alex and their lawyer. The negotiation took place in a neutral conference room, tense and charged with emotion. On one side sat Alex, calm but resolute, flanked by Ms. Patel and a few trusted neighbors. Across the table were the remnants of the HOA board, visibly uneasy as they faced the consequences of their actions. Alex laid out their demands clearly. First, the HOA must relocate their office off Alex's land within 6 months. Second, they owed compensation for the years of harassment and stress caused by the violation notices. And finally, the board had to implement stricter oversight measures to prevent future abuses of power. To everyone's surprise, the HOA didn't put up much of a fight. Cornered and humiliated, they reluctantly agreed to the terms, knowing they had no other choice. News of the settlement sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Residents celebrated the victory, hailing Alex as a hero, but Alex knew this was just the beginning. With the old board officially stepping down, the Community Reform Group turned its attention to rebuilding the HOA from the ground up. Elections were organized to select new leaders who reflected the values of transparency, fairness, and inclusivity. Candidates campaigned not on enforcing rigid rules, but on fostering a sense of community, a refreshing shift from the previous regime. As the dust settled, Alex noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now exchanged warm greetings and shared stories over backyard barbecues. Mrs. Thompson proudly displayed her gnomes again, this time without fear of reprisal. Mr. Patel installed a small wind chime near his porch, something he'd always wanted to do, but never dared under the old rules. Even the streets seemed brighter, as if the oppressive weight of the HOA's control had lifted, letting fresh air flow through. Through it all, Alex remained humble. They hadn't sought fame or recognition. They simply wanted justice, but seeing how their actions had brought people together gave them a profound sense of fulfillment. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not because it adhered to strict guidelines, but because it embraced individuality and mutual respect. Still, Alex knew challenges lay ahead. Rebuilding trust would take time, and ensuring the new HOA stayed true to its promises required vigilance. But as they stood on their porch one evening, watching children play and neighbors laugh, they felt hopeful. The quiet suburban street they loved hadn't just survived the storm. It had emerged stronger, more united, and ready to write a new chapter. Months after the dramatic showdown with the HOA, life in the neighborhood had transformed in ways Alex could never have imagined. The once oppressive atmosphere of rigid rules and silent resentment had given way to a vibrant, supportive community where people genuinely cared about one another. Neighbors no longer lived as strangers behind closed doors. Instead, they shared meals, organized block parties, and even started a community garden that became the pride of the subdivision. The new HOA board, elected by popular vote, operated with a completely different mindset. Gone were the days of nitpicking over mailbox colors or punishing homeowners for minor infractions. Instead, the focus shifted to fostering collaboration and improving quality of life for everyone. Monthly meetings turned into open forums where residents voiced their ideas and concerns without fear of judgment. Under this renewed leadership, the HOA office itself relocated to a modest space on rented property, a symbolic gesture acknowledging accountability and humility. For Alex, the transformation was both rewarding and humbling. They hadn't set out to become a leader, but their actions had inspired others to step up and take ownership of their community. People often approached Alex to thank them, not just for exposing the truth about the land, but for reminding everyone that standing up against injustice could spark positive change. Though Alex still preferred a quiet life, they embraced their role as a catalyst, attending gatherings and encouraging neighbors to keep pushing for fairness and kindness. One sunny Saturday morning, the neighborhood came together for its first annual Unity Day, an event born out of the desire to celebrate their newfound solidarity. Families gathered in the park, children ran around laughing, and tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes contributed by residents. At the center of it all stood Alex, reluctantly accepting a small plaque engraved with the words, "For courage and leadership, a true neighbor." As applause erupted, Alex felt a lump rise in their throat. This wasn't just recognition of what they'd done, it was proof that their efforts had brought people closer. But beyond the celebrations and milestones, deeper changes took root. Conversations among neighbors grew more meaningful, focused not on superficial appearances, but on building connections. When someone needed help repairing a fence or caring for a pet during a vacation, offers poured in willingly. The community garden flourished, becoming a symbol of collective effort, with each plot tended by different families who exchanged tips and stories while working side by side. Even the physical landscape of the neighborhood reflected the shift. Houses retained their charm, but now creativity blossomed within the framework of guidelines. Brightly painted front doors, quirky yard decorations, and personalized touches added character without disrupting harmony. It was a balance Alex appreciated, a reminder that rules existed to enhance life, not stifle it. As time passed, Alex reflected on how far they'd come. What began as frustration and isolation had evolved into belonging and purpose. Their home, once a source of stress, now felt like a sanctuary surrounded by friends. And while the memory of those relentless violation notices lingered, it served as a testament to resilience and the power of speaking up. In the end, Alex realized the true victory wasn't just reclaiming their land or reforming the HOA. It was rediscovering the heart of a community. The neighborhood had weathered a storm, emerging stronger and more united than ever before. And though Alex remained humble, they couldn't help but smile knowing they had played a part in creating something beautiful, a place where people truly belonged.